It's a Saturday night on a hillside in Rio de Janeiro, and the bass is coming up through the concrete before you even see the speakers. No guitar, no live drums, just a machine beat, a looping sample from an American record, and a vocalist calling out in Portuguese over a rhythm that can shake a wall off its foundation. What you're hearing is phonk carioca. It was already 20 years old by the time the rest of the world noticed it existed. In 2022, a singer from a low-income neighborhood in Rio became the first Brazilian artist ever to lead the Billboard Global Excluding US chart. Its rhythms now run through international pop without anyone tracing them back to a hillside party in the 1980s. But in Rio in 1985, phonk carioca had no labels, no radio play, and no audience outside the city. Just a drum machine loop, and a city that had decided the people making this music didn't belong in the flat parts of town. That exclusion is the whole story. To understand it, you have to go back to 1902. To understand why the hills of Rio produced phonk carioca, you have to understand who those hills were built for, or rather, who they weren't. Rio de Janeiro was founded by the Portuguese in 1565, and for nearly 300 years, it functioned as the largest slave port in the Americas. Between 500,000 and 1 million Africans were trafficked through Valongo Wharf alone. The city's economic foundation was black labor. When Brazil abolished slavery in the late 19th century, the formerly enslaved had nowhere to go. No land redistribution, no housing. They formed dense urban communities, cortiços, essentially tenements, in and around the city center. Then, in 1902, the city appointed a new mayor. His name was Pereira Passos, and he had a vision for Rio as a modern European capital. He tore down the cortiços. Rio's own historical record shows those displaced residents, predominantly Afro-Brazilian, moved to live in the city's hills, creating the first favelas. The hills were occupied because there was nowhere else to go. The word favela carries this in its etymology. It comes from a scrub plant from Bahia, the same plant that grew on a hillside where soldiers returning from the War of Canudos settled when the government offered them no housing. They named their camp Favela Hill. The name spread. In 1960, Brazil moved its capital to Brasília. Jobs dried up. Droughts in Brazil's northeast pushed rural workers toward the cities. They arrived in Rio, found scarce work, and couldn't afford rent in the formal city. The hillsides kept filling. Brazil's military dictatorship pursued a favela eradication policy, relocating hundreds of thousands to peripheral housing on the suburban fringe. Drug factions moved into the geographic vacuum the state had left. Walls built after 2009 made the separation structural and permanent. The favelas were visible from the beach neighborhoods directly below. But they had been systematically cut off. They had their own economy, their own governance, and increasingly, their own culture. And that culture needed music. The culture that needed music already had a blueprint. In the 1970s, before there was phonk carioca, there was Black Rio, a movement centered on American soul that swept through Rio's Afro-Brazilian working-class communities. A group called Soul Grand Prix organized dances at clubs in Rio, drawing on James Brown, Kool and the Gang, and Wilson Pickett. Their sound systems sometimes ran more than 100 speakers. Crowds could reach 10,000 people. That infrastructure, the speakers, the promoters, the money, existed entirely outside Rio's formal music industry. Brazil's military dictatorship noticed. In the mid-1970s, the secret police began infiltrating soul dances, associating black cultural gatherings with leftist organizing. Two organizers, Dom Filot and his cousin Nirto, were detained and later imprisoned. The state understood something the mainstream didn't. These gatherings were political, whether their organizers called them that or not. The crackdown slowed the soul movement, but it didn't dismantle the party infrastructure. It just changed the soundtrack. By the early 1980s, Rio's party circuit had split. Bailey Charm offered slower R&B. Bailey funk offered harder bass and faster tempos. The question is where that bass came from. Miami was a popular plane stop for Rio DJs, and Miami in the early 1980s had record stores in historically black neighborhoods like Liberty City, Gould's, and Overtown, selling a local sound nobody else had heard: Miami bass. Heavy Roland TR-808 drum machine beats, a sustained kick that was more physical sensation than note. Rio DJs bought these records and brought them home in their luggage. The music arrived without context. People couldn't understand the English titles, so they renamed songs by phonetically mimicking the chorus. Melodou, the song of the, followed by whatever Portuguese approximation fit. The American originals dissolved. What listeners kept was only the rhythm, the bass, and the Portuguese words they invented. According to DJ Marlboro himself, the single that most decisively kicked off funk Carioca was Planet Rock by Africa Bambaataa and Soul Sonic Force, released in 1982. The most common early funk Carioca drum beat was a loop from DJ Battery Brain's 808 Volt, so ubiquitous it acquired its own nickname, the Volt Mix, a drum machine loop, a flight layover. That is the specific concrete origin of a global genre. DJ Marlboro, born in 1963, raised in a Rio district his peers nicknamed Marlboro Country, recorded his first LP in 1989, Funk Brazil. His first hit, Melô da Mulher Feia, a Portuguese reworking of Two Live Crew's doo-wah ditty, became a smash on Rio radio. The Bailey funk circuit ran almost entirely on cassette tapes. DJs recorded parties. Fans bought the tapes at bus stops and informal markets. A hit in one favela spread to another through hand-copied cassettes, without a label, without a distributor, without anyone's permission. By the mid-1990s, most funk being played at Rio's bales was made locally by Rio producers for Rio audiences. The localization was total. But the world still didn't know this was happening. So why Rio specifically? Miami bass reached other cities. 808 drum machines were available anywhere. Portuguese was spoken across Brazil. Why did this collision only happen here? Look at a map of Rio, and you see a city defined by constraint. The ocean is to the south and east. Mountains rise from the city's edge. The flat, buildable land is a narrow strip between the two, controlled by money from the colonial period onward. The wealthy Zona Sul developed along the coast: Ipanema, Leblon, Copacabana. The Moros rose directly behind them, sometimes less than a kilometer away. Rocinha, Rio's largest favela, sits between the wealthy districts of São Conrado and Gavia, on a steep hillside, about a kilometer from a beach. In 2022, its population density reached 50,112 people per square kilometer. Its residents traveled daily into the neighborhoods below to clean, cook, and build, then return up the hill. The geography of labor and the geography of residence are two different maps laid on top of each other. This physical proximity without social integration is the key. The formal music industry was oriented towards samba, MPB, música popular brasileira, bossa nova for export. The favelas were a nuisance, not a market. So the Bale Funk circuit built its own complete infrastructure. Furacão 2000, which started in the 1970s as a merger of two rival sound teams, became the dominant force in the Rio party circuit, running events, pressing cassettes, moving money entirely inside the favela economy. DJ Marlboro put it plainly: the bales in Rio have survived such a long time because we do the bales to please the public. We work with music that doesn't need to be recognized or be successful in the rest of the world. That indifference to outside approval is a direct product of geography. When you're on the hillside, cut off from the valley's institutions, you stop waiting for the valley to notice. 68% of favela residents in Brazil are Pardo, mixed race, or black. DJ Marlboro once gave the most precise account of his working conditions. "My sound systems have bullet holes in them from police attacks." And yet, the music kept going. What happened when the world finally noticed is what changes everything. The first breach came in 2001 when a compilation called Favela Chic reached an international audience on BMG, the first time phonk Carioca tracks appeared on a non-Brazilian label. In 2004, Berlin DJ Daniel Haxman released Rio Baile Funk Favela Booty Beats, and American DJ Diplo made a bootleg mixtape called Favela on Blastin'. The tipping point was 2005. MIA, the British-Sri Lankan artist working with Diplo, released Bucky Dun Gun, built directly on phonk Carioca rhythms. It became the first phonk Carioca-inspired track ever played on mainstream radio in Brazil. And international artists' repurposing is what finally made Brazilian radio take it seriously at home. Here is the receipt. By 2004, phonk Carioca had existed for 20 years, hundreds of DJs, thousands of cassette releases, and it took a British-Sri Lankan rapper working with an American DJ to get it onto mainstream Brazilian airwaves. Anita, raised in Honorio Gurgel, one of Rio's lowest human development index neighborhoods, began her career in 2010 with funk producer Batutinha and signed with Furacão 2000. By 2022, her track Involver made her the first Brazilian artist to top the Billboard Global Excluding US chart. At the 2016 Rio Olympics opening ceremony, Anita performed alongside Caetano Veloso and Gilberto Gil. Phonk Carioca was officially national culture. Abroad, phonk automotivo is now called Brazilian phonk by producers who don't know its origin. The city whose demonym, Carioca, is embedded in the genre's name has been written out of the international label. The hills of Rio gave this music its identity. The algorithm gave it a new one. So here's the answer. Why did phonk Carioca come from the hills of Rio? Because the hills were where the city put the people it didn't want to hear. A mayor in 1902 demolished the cortiços and sent the poor up the slopes. A military dictatorship surveilled the soul parties. A formal music industry looked away. In that enforced isolation, a community built a genre out of cassette tapes, drum machine loops, and Miami records that now runs through the bloodstream of global pop. That isolation was total enough and long enough to let the music become fully itself. The question the history leaves open: if a major label had signed DJ Marlboro in 1989, would the world have gotten the sound that eventually reached the top of the global charts, or something polished, palatable, and forgotten? The hills are still there. The question is still open.